All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to see you all wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this ConnexUs Thursday Talk. As always, I'm Xander Willoughby. I work on ConnexUs here at Search for Common Ground, and I'm really excited to be your host. If this is your first Thursday Talk, welcome. For those of you joining via the climate security campaign, welcome to the first in this series of activities hosted by ConnexUs and USAID Center for Conflict and Violence Prevention. The climate security campaign is called Climate Security, Finding Shared Solutions to Shared Challenges. And this is our second knowledge sharing campaign in this series. The first one, many of you joined us for the conflict sensitivity and integration campaign. We've now moved on to climate security. As always, this is an invitation both for a series of activities like ConnexUs Thursday Talks, discussion forums on ConnexUs, shared resources, featured blogs. So that's both content that we put out and sent out, but also heavily relies on you, the audience, and the community to share your resources on ConnexUs so that we can send it out and foster collective learning. Before we get started, I want to plug two important activities in particular. And you'll see this in the chat soon and also in the follow-up email or show notes. The first is our featured blog, Integrating Climate Security and Development Practice, which we just published, written by Katanga Sayuba and Karen Meyer of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. You'll see a link of that soon. It's a really great piece. Really keen to hear everybody's thoughts on that. The second is an opportunity to influence or inform USAID's climate security strategy. So in the discussion forum, as always, chat in the show notes. You'll see the question, what innovations or lessons have you identified in your work that you think USAID should be incorporating into their efforts to address the joint challenges of climate change and conflict? So this is a really great opportunity to plug your thoughts, share your opinions. If you've done research on the topic, if you're interested in further discussion, to share that over. As a note, these sessions are recorded. During the Q&A session, you're welcome to ask your questions out loud, to share thoughts and opinions. If for safety and security concerns, you would like to be edited out of the recording, which will be posted on YouTube and on ConnexUs and shared out, just send me an email and we can edit that out. Not an issue there. When we get to the discussion, there are two ways to participate. The first is the raise your hand function. At the bottom of your bar, you should see a hand. Raise it, then I can call on you. The second is the Q&A function on your GoToWebinar dashboard. You can put your questions in there. I'll direct them to the relevant speaker, share them with the audience, etc. So with housekeeping aside, I'm very excited to be joined by Dr. Daniel Abrahams. Daniel is the Senior Climate Security Advisor for the Bureau of Conflict Prevention and Stabilization at USAID. He's going to set the stage for us, introduce our speakers today. And Daniel, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Xander, and thanks for all the work that you've done in supporting this campaign. And a big thank you to many of the USAID folks who are behind the scene, because they really deserve a real round of applause, but we'll take virtual. So I'm really excited for this series, and I'm very excited for this panel because it continues to reframe questions of climate security beyond just a matter of risk, and really starts to hone in on what it means from a programmatic lens. And that's really the emphasis of this broader ConnexUs campaign, and certainly the climate security series of what does this mean programmatically for those that are working directly with communities most acutely affected by the joint challenges of climate change and conflict. And just a second on USAID's approach to climate change and security. To the extent possible, we really emphasize these as joint challenges of climate change, of conflict, of individual level vulnerabilities. And I see that as an important distinction because it necessitates that we not only consider the potential of climate change to affect patterns or risks of conflict. But quite critically, how conflict affects climate change vulnerability. And underscoring that challenge is the fact that 75% of places USAID works, depending on how one examines the data, are affected or recovering from some form of organized violent conflict. And we know climate change is a stressor of other systems. It's going to manifest in terms of impacts on water, on the access, availability, and quality. It's going to affect the productivity and quantity and quality and distribution of resources, as well as long held formal and informal governance structures related to land. And it's going to have massive, or it is having massive effects on global food systems. That understanding that is where those systems, where the rubber meets the road, is essential for understanding what it means to address the joint challenges of climate change and conflict. And why, from a programmatic perspective, I think these three toolkits, which focus on land and conflict, water and conflict, and food systems and food security and conflict, offer a means to address climate change and security. And we have no choice but to innovate. And that is what these toolkits do. And for that matter, so do our panelists. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our first of three. So we have Carol Boudreau, Nikki Banky, and Jesse Anderson, who will all present their respective toolkits. And we'll start with Carol Boudreau, who is the Senior Land and Resource Governance Advisor for USAID and the lead author of the Land and Conflict Toolkit. Over to you, Carol.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm here today to talk about a new land and conflict toolkit. We're going to call it version 2.0 of a very popular product that was produced about 20 years ago, actually, between the land team and the conflict mitigation team. This new iteration of the toolkit, I just want to acknowledge, is a joint production of the Center for Conflict and Violence Prevention, CVP, and the Land and Resource Governance Division, where I sit. I want to acknowledge that Daniel is my co-author on this refresh of the Land and Conflict Toolkit. It was such a great pleasure to work with him and to work with many other USAID colleagues to bring this toolkit up to date a little bit. So we can go to the next slide. All right, so why talk about land and conflict? Well, for those of you who work on the issues of conflict and violence prevention, you'll be very well aware of the fact that land is often access to land, control of land, the ability to use land is often one of the driving forces contributing to conflict. So we decided that it was time for us, along with CVP, to take a look at the existing toolkit, refresh it, bring it up to date, and give our stakeholders a newer and hopefully a fresher product to work with. The toolkit talks about the purpose and audiences. It does try to take a very complicated, difficult subject and explain for you the linkages and the relationships between good or weak land governance and conflict, and points out that weak land governance creates many risks that contribute to conflict, but at the same time, improving land and resource governance systems can be a factor that contributes to peace building. So land and resource governance can be weak, can be a risk, but good can be an opportunity. And we try to do this and present this material from a real systems perspective. So understanding how the land and resource governance system writ large, the institutions, the rules, the norms, contribute to problems of conflict and how we can use those systems and adjust them to do no harm. Our audience for this toolkit is whether you're a USAID staff, our mission staff, whether you're with a different development organization, whether you're with our implementing partners, or a member of civil society. We hope it's a broadly applicable toolkit, and we hope it'll help you do things like support strategic planning, whether you're working on a CDCS or whether you're doing program design and thinking about how it is that you can address land issues through that programmatic design. We provide some materials to support monitoring, evaluation, and learning, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then we have at the end of the toolkit, the thing I'm most excited about, which is our rapid appraisal guide, which can help you to do an assessment or complement other assessments that you're doing to better ensure that we do no harm in our work. I have a link up here on the screen if you're able to see the screen to the toolkit, and I want to warmly encourage you to take advantage of that and take a look at our new toolkit. We're very proud of it. So we can go to the next slide. And on the next slide, I'll tell you what the main sections of our toolkit are. We talk about key issues, lessons learned. We examine a couple of recent programming options to explain for you how you can address issues like tenure insecurity or displaced populations through programming. We have a fairly long section on tools and resources. And then, as I mentioned just a moment ago, we have that rapid appraisal guide at the end. So we can go to the next slide. And so what's new in this version 2.0? Well, 20 years have passed. Some things are the same, but some things have changed. And certainly for USAID, one of the things that's changed is that we are a climate agency now, and thinking really carefully, as Daniel just noted, about climate and linkages between climate and security. So I think what you'd see that's new in the toolkit, and I encourage you to explore it, is a much stronger focus on climate and conflict. And so we touch on issues such as how will resource availability contribute to or have the potential to contribute to conflict related to access to land or access to water or access to natural resources found on land. We know that climate is contributing and climate change is contributing in really powerful ways to migration. So if you think about migration, migration is intimately tied to land issues, whether people are leaving land behind, and people who are left behind have challenges around securing the lands that they're still holding, or whether people are moving into new areas and need to integrate into host communities. The ability to secure tenure in those situations can be challenging. Really important issue, we think, is the issue of green grabbing as we see more and more money flowing into climate finance activities. Who will benefit not who will benefit from those flows of resources, but also who will control important resources such as wetlands or forests that are storing carbon. We also spend some time on questions of green energy minerals, an important component to many renewable energy resources, and think about who will control access as well to those minerals and the land on which and under which those minerals are located. So those are some very quick highlights about what's new in this version, and we can go to the next slide, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the key issues that we discussed. So obviously, this is a big topic, land conflict. This toolkit is not meant to be completely exhaustive. Rather, it's meant to provide some good dives into a couple of key issues. And you can see them listed here. I won't name all of them, but I will note that we think it's very important to be looking at issues of human mobility, that is movements of people across places and across time, some movements which can be circular, other movements away from rural areas into urban areas or through rural areas. For example, a herder and farmer conflict might be an example of human mobility that leads to conflict associated with access to or control of different land-based resources. The issue of land grabbing, which was a really big, important issue after the previous food crisis of 2007, 2008, is one that's probably still with us. It may be adjusting a little bit, as I just mentioned, towards green grabbing, but we think this is still an important issue. And of course, as the climate changes, we will see areas degrading, leading to people leaving land values decreasing. In other areas, conditions will improve, land values will rise, people will be moving into those areas, and that also has potential for conflict, more people migrating into livable areas, people leaving other areas that are less livable. And we talk a bit about post-conflict issues. What should you do about land, housing, property issues after a conflict is ended? How can you be thinking about those? So we can go to the next slide. And thank you, Xander. We do have a section on what are the lessons we've learned, and I'll do this very quickly. We identify 5 really important issues that we think should be reflected in our programming and our thinking about land and conflict. Number 1, no surprise, I'm sure to anybody, is the absolutely critical issue of identifying and assessing power dynamics in a particular context, understanding not only who controls land and access to land today, but how shifting that control and access will affect others. So really getting a good political economy perspective. Many of the problems associated with access to and control over land, particularly on the government side, are associated with limited capacities, limited ability to manage things like national or local cadasters, land registries, land information systems, land management functions. So strengthening those local level capacities can be a good solution to some of these problems. We in our division spend a lot of time thinking about equitable and inclusive solutions. And of course, for USAID, this is a key priority. So we place a lot of focus on how to include women, indigenous peoples, youth in our activities so that they can speak into process. We do also talk quite a lot in the toolkit about promoting durable solutions, solutions that will lead to effective resettlements, effective integration into host communities or into cities, supporting issues of sustainable urbanization. And then we have some materials that I hope will be useful for you around how to integrate land into your monitoring and evaluation. If you're doing conflict programming, we provide some sample theories of change, a list of indicators. These would be standard US government indicators, but as well examples of custom indicators that might be useful. And I'll point out something that I think is unique. The Land and Resource Governance Division has created a module for surveys on land and conflict. And so if you're doing some quantitative survey-based work, you might find that module of interest. Finally, we do talk about how it is that you can work on these issues across the USAID program lifecycle. And I'm almost done, so I'll close out and turn to the next person. But I would be remiss if I didn't end by pointing you to our rapid appraisal guide, which is really a modular tool that you can use to help understand and assess a conflict dynamic that is associated with land. The tool provides you with a set of questions to help clarify the big picture associated with land and conflict. So it helps you get at that political economy context and helps you ask the right kinds of questions to understand what's working, what's not working in the legal and policy framework. But then it provides a list of detailed questions around key issues that target particular stakeholders. Those might be migrants, those might be farmers, those might be government officials or the private sector. So you almost can do a pick and choose to put together the materials that are important for you in your context and with your issues. Hopefully, what this does is identify the levers that can be pulled if you're thinking in systems change language. What are the levers that we might be able to pull through programming or advocacy to affect change? Where are those pain points? How can we build alliances to address those pain points? Okay, so we encourage you to visit the toolkit. If you have questions around landing conflict, super happy to respond to them. And with that, Daniel, I'll turn the floor back to you. Thank you. And thanks, Xander.
Thanks so much, Carol. That was great. And if you like the preview, you're going to love the movie. So please do check out the whole toolkit. And I'm sure that's the same for all of these. And with that, I am going to pass it to my colleague, Nikki Banke. Nikki is a program specialist within the Water Security, Sanitation and Hygiene Center within USAID. She focuses on Middle East support and is the Washington point of contact for improving coherence across humanitarian development and peace approaches to WASH and water resource management. Over to you, Nikki.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And as Daniel said, my name is Nikki Banke. I work at USAID Center for Water Security, Sanitation, and Hygiene. And as my team likes to say, the climate crisis is a water crisis. When you think about the day-to-day impacts that climate change is going to have on people, water is really how climate change is rearing its head, whether it's too much water, too little water, or polluted water. This also means that water security is critical for climate resilience and adaptation. We're hoping that this toolkit can shed some light on the linkages between climate, conflict, and water, and ultimately help to improve programs in both traditionally stable, but also in conflict affected areas. Before I launch into the toolkit, I want to give a shout out to the many people who helped make this possible. And that includes colleagues at Duke University, Nicholas School of the Environment, who really did a tremendous amount of work on this. And then also USAID HQ and mission staff, as well as implementing partner organizations, all of whom participated in interviews to inform this toolkit. Next slide, please. So this version of the toolkit is also a 2.0. It's based on a 2014 version of the Water and Conflict Toolkit. So I wanted to kind of walk through what is the same and what has changed with this version of the toolkit. So the 2014 toolkit was really rooted in evidence about how water can contribute to conflict or cooperation. We built on that foundation and that great evidence, and we also went a step further to include the other ways that water security, sanitation, and hygiene can interact with conflict. This includes guidance on how conflict affects WASH service delivery, as well as more detail on the links between water security and peace building and stabilization. The 2014 toolkit went through how water and conflict interact with some critical sectors and critical issues. So we wanted to keep that critical information. And we made a few additions, including more information on climate change and then a number of other current administration priorities. And then while the 2014 toolkit was framed around conflict sensitivity and do no harm, the new toolkit goes a step further to really frame the toolkit in the concept of conflict integration, which I'm sure you've all heard about through this series. And that includes conflict sensitivity and do no harm approaches, but it's also the intentional effort to address the collective dynamics that underpin peace, security, and core sectoral and development goals. We found the programming examples in the previous version of the toolkit to be a really useful way to communicate best practices. So we updated those examples with more recent and practical examples. And then finally, we added a conflict analysis guide, which I'll get into later. We're hoping that the updates we've made to the toolkit will make it more practical for implementing partners and for missions. And I should also note that this version of the toolkit is aligned with the new US government global water strategy and its new strategic objective 4, which is focused on water-related conflict and fragility. Next slide. So going into the purpose and how this is organized. So first, I wanted to flag an acronym that you may not have seen before, and you've probably heard me saying, is water security, sanitation, and hygiene. And USAID has begun to use this broader term beyond just WASH because it encompasses both WASH and water resources management to support ecosystems, livelihoods, and industry. And the revised global water strategy also reflects this broader understanding of all of the different things we need to address in order to achieve a water secure world. So just to walk through the main content sections of the toolkit. First, we go into background on water and conflict. As I mentioned, this includes how water can contribute to conflict and cooperation, but also how conflict affects water security, and then also linkages to peace building and stabilization. There's a subsection under this that includes cross-cutting themes, which I'll go into in a second. Then the next main section is cross-sectoral considerations for water programming. And again, I'll go into a little bit more detail about each of these sections. Then we go into the WASH best practices and programming strategies. And that includes specific guidance on monitoring, evaluation, and learning in conflict-affected and fragile settings. And then finally, there's a conflict analysis guide. We also have a couple of very useful annexes. One mentions strategic priorities that USAID has adopted. And then there's also a really helpful table that summarizes considerations and resources for each stage of the USAID program cycle. Next slide. So I mentioned that we expanded the subject matter of this toolkit to include the different ways that water and conflict interact. So we've kind of broken it down into 3 sections that are somewhat summarized in this nifty. First, there's conflict prevention and WSH or WASH programming, how water resources management and water security can interact with conflict or cause, how water related disputes can trigger new conflict, exacerbate existing conflict, or multiply conflict risk or lead to cooperation, which does happen in a lot of cases as well. Then there's the section on conflict impacts on WASH service delivery. This includes interruptions in service, also destruction of infrastructure. There's direct and incidental impacts that conflict has on WASH service delivery. And then finally, there's the component that is WASH stabilization and peace building. And this is improving water resources management and providing sustainable WASH services and how that can be part of the foundation of a more peaceful and stable society. Next slide. Great. So I mentioned those cross-cutting themes, and quickly to touch on those, these are some of the key themes that are integrated throughout the toolkit. They can't really be contained in a single paragraph or a single subsection, but we still wanted to call them out specifically because they're so inextricably linked to water and conflict. This includes governance and institutional challenges, gender and marginalized populations, climate change, and then data and transparency. Next slide. And then there's cross-sectoral considerations for water programming. And so this is a holdover from the previous toolkit, recognizing that no sector or development issue exists in a vacuum. We wanted to explore the interdependencies between water and several different key issues as they relate to conflict. And so this includes disaster risk reduction, human migration and demographics, agriculture and food security, energy, health and well-being, and environment and ecosystem. Next slide. So bringing us back to this figure again, because I think it's a useful way to organize the programming examples. We recognize that plenty of programs and contexts don't fit neatly into one of the three categories that I described earlier. But we have three really strong examples of best practices under each component. We know that no two contexts are alike, no two conflicts are alike. There's sudden conflict, there's acute conflict, there's protracted conflict. But we do hope that these success stories give you at least a starting point for WASH programming, no matter what stage of conflict or stability you're operating in. So this includes several great examples for conflict prevention, including Nigeria, Kyrgyzstan, and Southern Africa. And then in conflict-affected contexts, we had the Philippines, the Sahel, and South Sudan. Then for peace building and stabilization, we had Haiti, South Sudan once again, and Jordan. And so we got a good geographic distribution. And I really feel great about how strong these examples are for applying to your context as much as you can. Next slide, please. So the last thing I want to highlight here is the new conflict analysis guide for water security, sanitation, and hygiene programming. Conflict analysis is a really important tool that's increasingly being recommended for USAID programs. The aim here is to enable implementers to assess conflict context in a structured and methodical way. And the toolkit ends with a long list of additional resources for conducting conflict analysis in case a project requests it or a procurement requests it, just to give you a starting point for the kinds of questions that we need to ask to make sure that we understand the interaction between our project and conflict. Next slide, please. And that's it from me. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy reading the toolkit.
Thanks so much, Nikki. And yeah, much appreciated to the Duke team as well for this really great work and this excellent resource. So I'm going to turn it to our final presenter now, my esteemed colleague, Jessica Anderson. Jessie is the Senior Conflict Advisor in the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, where she leads efforts on conflict integration and humanitarian development, peace, coherence. Over to you, Jessie.
Awesome. Daniel, thank you. Thank you so much for organizing us. So yeah, similar to Nikki and Carol, I'll give a quick overview of this new Feed the Future toolkit on conflict integration. And first, I would like to thank the Duke University colleagues that work so closely with us on this tool, in particular, Jack, the USAID missions that participated in consultations, and then the CVP colleagues that were so helpfully involved, specifically Daniel, yourself, and David Alfer. I'm not sure if he's on the line. And we can head to the next slide. So I'm going to pitch this a little differently because there actually isn't a predecessor toolkit for this topic. So I'm going to give a little bit of the so what to thinking about conflict and food. So Over the past year, the relationship between food and conflict has really been in our headlines. I hope this slide expresses that a little bit. We have the war in Ukraine, a global food crisis, and then a hunger crisis in the Horn of Africa that I know many of us are engaged on, that's driven by a mix of climate and conflict factors. So we know this topic really matters today. And to me, the current crisis is important and heartbreaking, but I'd also like to suggest that beyond these headlines, that unfortunately, fragility and violence are nearly everywhere, including within and throughout our food system. And we can head to the next slide. So I'll just share a couple statistics on the global picture here. So hunger is on the rise for the first time in decades, with conflict as a key driver. The number of people living in conflict is on the rise too, which you can see in the figure on the left. And then if you look at the chart on the right, these fragile and conflict-affected places are ripe for acute food crises. And Feed the Future, which I'll mention more about in a second, is focused in a number of these countries, from target countries that are highlighted in yellow to aligned countries that have a red box around them. And we can head to the next slide. Now you might be wondering, who is this toolkit for? So this toolkit was developed specifically for USAID staff and implementing partners that are implementing Feed the Future, which is the US government's global hunger and food security initiative. And this is a $1 billion plus initiative. However, even though Feed the Future was the impetus for this toolkit, it can be useful for anyone, mission and partner colleagues interested in conflict integration in the context of food systems. That's really the scope of this toolkit. And even though there's some framing around Feed the Future, it can really be used beyond that. Now, I'll quickly highlight too, there's a new strategy behind this initiative, Feed the Future, and that's the Global Food Security Strategy. So this was launched in this past fall, 2022, for the period 2022 to 2026. This strategy guides this $1 billion plus initiative, and it now excitingly includes a cross-cutting goal on conflict integration, which is a huge win to me. So we can head to the next slide now. So now I will focus on what is in this toolkit. First is the relationship between conflict and food systems. So this section kind of does what I've been trying to do over the past minute or so. It gives you the pitch on why this relationship matters so much, and then insight on how. In short, I'll just say, the better we understand the connection between conflict and food systems, the better we can meet our Feed the Future goals, while also contributing to a more peaceful world. It's a win-win, and we know this matters. Now, next in the toolkit, there's a lot of guidance, tools, and resources throughout the program cycle. So there's a good overview of key concepts like conflict sensitivity, conflict integration, and then we dig into what it looks like specifically to develop a conflict-sensitive theory of change, activity design, implementation, and MEL. And this section includes examples from distinct contexts. So we weave throughout examples from Kenya and Honduras, for instance, throughout these sections, as well as these in-depth examples and diagrams from particular parts of the food system. Those include nutrition-specific interventions or markets and livelihoods, or working with the seed system, for instance. So we just try to paint a picture of exactly what it can be looking like to integrate conflict. Now, the next section has a lot of programming examples. And this is really, everything needs to be driven by the local context. However, to inspire that work in whatever context you're in, we provide a lot of information on different kinds of scenarios, different kinds of conflict drivers. For instance, from resource conflicts to lack of public trust, to low social cohesion, to lack of economic opportunity, and really walk through the logic behind a range of activities that have been successful in addressing those drivers. Now, the next section focuses on resilience in conflict. So resilience is one of the 3 key objectives to the Global Food Security Strategy. And so this section digs into the resilience framework, which can really be helpful for folks who are thinking about climate and conflict together. The resilience framework thinks about risk broadly, and it can be helpful for thinking about conflict alongside interrelated and compounding risks, such as climate change. Now, the next section, the last section I'll talk about, is a series of mission case studies. We're very grateful to get 5 missions to have a series of consultations on how they're integrating conflict across their portfolios at the country level. So this moves beyond specific activity designs, and it's really focused on things like missions, organizational structures, strategic approaches, training, different approaches they're trying that extend beyond a particular activity. And we can head to the next slide. Now, Xander, I'm so sorry. I think this involves a lot of clicking. Maybe click 3 times. Perfect. Okay. So, and one, we'll go back one. Apologies. So I'm just going to give a quick example from Nigeria for what it might mean or look like to utilize this toolkit. So Nigeria is such an important country. 1 in 4 Africans is a Nigerian, but it also has really distinct but overlapping kinds of fragility and violence taking place throughout the country. Now, the toolkit provides a general way to think about conflict integration in all of the different contexts of fragility, conflict, and violence going on in Nigeria. The content from across the program cycle applies equally to each geography, and it really gives a good baseline set of tools for any context. But that section on programming examples can be really helpful for the diverse and specific needs and conflict dynamics that might be going on. So for instance, we might be worried about urban protests and election-related violence in one part of Nigeria, as we have been over the past few months. But then perhaps in the Middle Belt, farmer-pastoralist conflict, different kinds of intercommunal conflict, and then violent extremist organizations in the Northeast and increasingly heading into the Northwest. So the toolkit both provides general approaches that really do apply in any context as a way to think about these issues, but then some of those specific programming examples that help paint a picture of what this would look like in different contexts. Then those mission case studies, they take a step back again. So for instance, how might USAID Nigeria address these diverse contexts together? What have other missions done at the portfolio and strategic level to be thinking about all of those different contexts together at once? So that's just a bit of insight into what that could look like. And then if we head to the next slide, I'm just going to quickly give a programming example of what it looks like to integrate conflict in a particular activity. So TerraV is a water security and resilience activity under RISE 2 in Niger. In the refine and implement stage of this activity, folks learned that 2/3 of conflict in Niger was related to farmer and pastoralist disputes, and they're expected only to rise due to climate change. At the same time, they learned national rules developed in the 1990s to guide natural resource management in programming areas ended up disadvantaging pastoralists. So, that's that key piece, that first key piece to conflict sensitivity, understanding the context. The second is about that two-way relationship between the context and the intervention. It was clear to TerraV that meeting NRM goals was impossible without addressing conflict, and that they needed to address this conflict at all levels, from local to policy levels. Now, the third piece is to adapt accordingly, to be moving ahead with those insights. So here's what they did. To make sure all people have equal access to resources, TerraV worked to secure grazing land and animal corridors through these really participatory processes that brought users together to agree on how to manage resources. They led to local conventions and bylaws between these groups, farmers and pastoralists, to manage resources. They even used a local popular radio station to share this message with people who couldn't attend. And then importantly, to address that national policy level aspect, TerraV trained land commissions and supported new land tenure policies at the national level. So what that ends up meaning is that we get an activity that's really thinking about these shared dynamics of peace, security, and sector goals. The bottom line is we know dynamics underlying these goals are one and the same. The shared information and rules and collective action that this activity created is crucial for all of these goals. And ideally, reducing conflict can create a virtuous circle. It paves the way for future economic and interdependence and collaboration that again serves all those goals together. So I'm going to pause there because I know the most important part of this is excellent conversation with the audience. The last thing I'll just flag quickly is that this toolkit is not available yet. It has been approved, but it's in the design phase. So please look out for it in the coming weeks. We look forward to advertising it broadly and getting your feedback. Thanks.
Thanks so much. So I am struck by how well this group was able to effectively and efficiently communicate how to use really complicated what are effectively manuals for addressing a host of different issues. And as Jesse highlighted, the most important thing and sort of the underlying point of this campaign is that we interact with you and that we think about, for those that are they're closest to these issues, how we can support you in addressing the joint challenges of food security and conflict, of water and conflict, and land and conflict. So I do encourage you to raise your hand or to come off mute or to post your questions. And if Sandra, there's any there, please feel free to come off mute and jump in. Over to you, Xander. Looks like you're coming off.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Carol, Nikki, and Jesse for sharing the toolkits, running us through those, and for the discussion that we'll have now. I see a couple questions coming in. Down at the bottom of your GoToWebinar dashboard, you'll see a Q&A function. You can put questions there or raise your hand and we can call on you and bring you off mute. There are a few questions in the chat about availability of the toolkits. The land and water toolkits are available. They're in the chat now. They'll also be in the show notes and in the follow-up email. And the food toolkit will come out shortly. Frederick, we had a question from you. Would you like to come off mute? If not, I can read it. Finding you in the queue. Go ahead if you'd like to ask your question. For Frederick?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Xander, nice to see you.
Good to see
Great
you.
to see you.
Glad you're here.
Yeah, I just caught up with Nikki's presentation. Thanks for all the beautiful presentation from all the speakers. But I think I noticed something on the cross-cutting themes in the toolkit. And I was wondering, in this age in this post-truth era, where we have a climate flooded with information, I was wondering how that toolkit could also be catering for those aspects of elements of the new era of infodemics that can potentially influence, or either as an enabler or as a preventer of conflict when it comes, or even peace building when it comes to water resources and land. And that, again, cuts across traditional communication, media or mediated systems of communication through mass media or technology and social media, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Frederick, and thanks for joining us. It's good to see you. Nikki, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, correct me if I didn't quite understand your question correctly, but one aspect of it was kind of in the chat said kind of why climate was considered to be a cross-cutting issue and like not integrated into the ecosystem's cross-sectoral issue. It's a little confusing because there's both. So the reason that climate is cross-cutting is because it shows up over and over again throughout the toolkit, including in the ecosystem section. So just to allay your fears, that's definitely, the ecosystem section, and pretty much every section of the toolkit goes into detail about how climate change can be a risk multiplier, or there are ways to mitigate conflict while also addressing the impacts of climate change. On the issue of post-truth, I totally understand what you're talking about. Yeah, so data for decision making is also a really important component of the toolkit. That's why data and transparency was also considered a cross-cutting issue. So we definitely highlight it in that sense. We don't specifically address the role of, mainly because this is meant to apply to USAID program cycle processes. And so media is relevant, but it's not necessarily directly connected to like program design. So
But
it's
Nikki, just sorry for cutting you short. What I mean, by the way, I'm a professor of media and security studies, and in media and security studies, we often are seeing media coming into the apex of even climate change solutions or even climate change problems. Well, for instance, remember Donald Trump denied the climate crisis, and it was blowed up, with Fox TV and Fox News and all that. And then this seeps down into grassroots perceptions and changes people's mentality in how they would want to support. You talked about co-creation somewhere there. So when you want to co-create with folks on the ground who have already been brainwashed, just excuse me for using that, or influenced into believing that the climate change is a hoax, then it means the chances of success at that level are also in jeopardy. So I would want to see a toolkit that would also come up with a solution that would dive across different platforms, at least an allowance for that, so that in any case, there would be a possibility of misinformation or disinformation or propaganda in that context. Then that cross-sectional cross-fertilization of what media role would be in all its form would play a role there. Otherwise, it would be an exercise in futility to underestimate how algorithms are used to spread false information and how that can rapidly change an intervention on the ground.
I'm going to jump in because I think these are really important points. And I think that there's two buckets. There's those that we can address and there's those that we can't. And I think that in terms of disinformation about climate change in general, beyond the scope of the toolkits, but it's a really important point. But there's two things that I want to raise here that I think are embedded within your questions. And I love that we're getting the perspectives of media and security professor. I would love to talk more about this after. But I think there's a couple things to consider that the toolkits do address. And I think the first is understanding how climate change does and does not relate to conflict becomes important here. Because it's important to understand not just where it might, but where it doesn't. And ensuring that we don't have, just for example, authoritative regimes leveraging narratives of climate change to abdicate their responsibility in conflict or violence or oppression against people. And in a lot of respects, these toolkits start speaking to those exact issues by parsing out where the effects of climate change start and where they stop and where those interventions are reality. And I think there's a second point to that, which is I'm just going to speak a little bit from my experience doing ground level research on climate change and security, and in particular on the climate change front. The folks that are dealing with the effects firsthand, that are farmers, that are hunters, that are fishermen or fisher folk, they see it every day. And the narratives matter in terms of understanding what drives or what the impacts are. And we can even bring in questions of theology here. But there is no doubt in their mind that things are changing. And we've seen some really, in these examples, really powerful narratives about how those that are both affected by climate change and conflict really acutely feel the effects of climate change in a powerful way. But I really love those questions and I really love those points, and there's more coming in. And we don't have that much time. So I'm going to turn it right back to Xander to address the next question. And thank you again for that thoughtful comment.
Thank you, Professor. It's good to see you. And thank you, Daniel. And thank you for your answers on that. Next, we have a question from Jonathan. If you'd like to unmute. If not, I can read your question.
Hi, Shay. This is Jonathan Bartolacci from Mercyport. Just a question related to the interconnectedness of these toolkits. As we know, land and water are in some cases two sides of the same coin. And I was just wondering whether there were plans on USAID's part to combine these toolkits in a way for those looking to make a more, say, holistic assessment or looking to look at these issues concurrently.
So that's a great question. And I'll start and then see if Daniel and Carol have any thoughts about this as well. in terms of combining the toolkits, we wanted to kind of keep them separate because, there are issues that are sort of specific to the water sector, specific to the land sector. But I will note that Daniel was on the writing team for the water and conflict toolkit, and I reviewed the land and conflict toolkit. So there's been a lot of cross-pollination at USAID and recognizing that these issues are completely interrelated and interdependent. They're not mutually exclusive toolkits. They reference each other. So it's really just for the sake of keeping, I guess, different technical lanes separate. But again, these sectors don't exist in silos. We know that they don't exist in a vacuum. So that's why we kind of shared technical expertise across our centers in developing these toolkits. So while they are separate toolkits, they're informed by each other, and a lot of the same people are working on the development of these free toolkits. I don't know if Daniel or Carol want to add anything.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nikki. And thanks, Jonathan, for that question. I think Nikki really captured the spirit here. We understand, as you point out, that these are closely related issues, as you said, like the flip side of the coin in a lot of ways or in some context. I think one of the reasons why I emphasize that the land and conflict toolkit is almost a modular tool is because you can pick out components maybe related to land degradation that might be associated with water or other issues that might bring out that water concern when it comes to land a little bit more clearly. So I think they probably stay, as Nikki said, distinct, but very much informed by each other. And I think you can pull pieces from each one to help inform the programming that you're doing. I think whether you're working on biodiversity issues, whether you're working on climate issues, whether you're working on agriculture, agroecological or food systems issues, having that integrated approach, we feel leads to much more sustainable programming. So if you can integrate land, water, ag together, as some of our programs are doing now, we hope we see more sustainable outcomes. But really good question. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you for the question. Great answers. I'll hand it to Chantal. Let me find you in the queue. There you go. Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you, Xander. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation of the toolkits. They sound super interesting. But I was really interested to understand, how are we expected to use this toolkit? Is it during the design phase? Is it if we're implementing projects that are on wash and land? So, and who is the audience for this? Thank you.
I'm actually going to fold that together. If Neil has a similar question, if I can find you. Nope, not able to find in the queue, so I'll read it. It says, congrats to the CVP for the Land and Conflict 2.0 and Water Conflict Toolkit. While USAID and practitioners are the primary audience, to what extent is thought being given to making these accessible in a way that local communities can use the tools to conduct their own conflict analyses? Also applaud the central reference to DNH. Daniel, do I toss that to you?
Sure, I'll do my best. I think if Jesse, you want to jump in because you haven't responded to a question yet, please feel free. But I guess real fast, in terms of the audience, great question, important question. And the fundamental answer is those designing and implementing programs. And I think that the target of this learning series, we're quite purposeful about this, is ground level actors. Everything about this is built to speak to folks that, for example, may not have great internet connections so they can access this. So the toolkits are very much in design of how USAID structures its program cycle. So in a lot of respects, it's about the designing of programs, but all of us were thinking deeply about the implementing community, including sort of the hyper-local communities that are going to be responding directly and also speak to USAID's localization push. And, with the lack of time, I'm not going to get too deep into that, but I just think that is the ultimate audience. I'll see if Jesse has anything quick to add, and then we'll go back to Xander and also want to give a quick chance to the CIPRI teams who just wrote a very compelling blog on the topic. Over to you, Xander.
Jesse, did you have anything otherwise? All right, cool. Great. I see the CIPRI team that just wrote our first featured blog in the campaign are here. I didn't ask them beforehand for permission. So if they're busy, no worries, I can pitch it. But if either Katango or Karen want to give a brief plug for the blog, if not, I will.
Yeah, sure. If not Kasungo, then yeah, no. So thanks to you, Xander, and the USAID team to publish our blog on the platform today. The blog is actually kind of a summary of a roundtable discussion that we had at the Stockholm Forum on Peace and Development last year. And the main purpose of that discussion that we would like to continue with this blog is to better understand what people working in practice on applying these types of tools that have been presented today, what they run into, because climate and security, it asks for a very wide set of expertise to be brought together, and that takes time. So that asks something from development practitioners, but also from the donor side. So that is what we try to highlight in the blog, and it would be really great to collect other views on this topic and to, as a community, see how we can further this approach. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karen. Apologies for putting you on the spot, but really appreciate and speaking of input, and while I'm sharing my screen, this discussion forum that I've also linked in the chat, specifically on how USAID can adapt its programming relating to climate security. We're very much interested in perspective and your opinions and your expertise. As we're losing folks to other meetings, I want to toss it back to the USAID team. If you have any sort of one thing you want folks to walk away with, any final things to plug?
I'm just gonna jump in. We're at time, so I'm gonna close this out real fast.
Perfect.
2 quick points. One, the entire campaign is meant to be interactive. We want to hear from folks from different perspectives, who to the questions we received, who are closer to the ground at the moment than we are, who just engage with us however you can, reach out to us. And I think second is an extraordinary amount of thanks goes to the presenters. It was a lot of work putting these together, and they effectively provided an outline of how you utilize a manual that speaks to a broader tool, or 3 broader tools to that end. And just very proud to have them as colleagues and encourage you to utilize these resources and to reach out to us as needed. And finally, just a thank you to Xander and all the work you've done, and in particular, the folks that are joining us in the call. We value and appreciate your time. Thank you for being here, and just please do follow up as things come up, and do read that great blog and engage with the forum. Over to you, Xander.
Perfect. Thank you all. As always, the recording will be up on ConnexUs and in your inbox as soon as we're able. The first 2 toolkits are already. We're looking forward to engaging with you throughout the campaign and at future Thursday Talks. With that, I'll close it out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.